It has been a big week or two in US politics. Let's start with President Donald Trump calling Vladimir Zelensky a dictator. We have been talking about this for the last couple of days, but this is a pretty significant barb to throw, isn't it?
It certainly is, Mel. You're right. And the basis of that claim is that Vladimir Zelensky was due to go to the polls last year, but under the terms of the martial law, which were imposed following Russia's invasion 3 years ago next week, the electoral process is suspended. There was not an election. It would be impossible to conduct an election while you have a war being waged on Ukrainian territory, while so many people are displaced. 8 million Ukrainians are living away from their own homes, either in other countries or other parts of the country. So how do you hold an election in those sort of circumstances? So there has not been an election as a result of that. There will be when peace comes. What Russia is trying to say, and now what Trump is saying, echoing rather strangely the words of the Kremlin, is that there needs to be an election in Ukraine as a prerequisite for a final peace settlement. Now, the concern there, of course, is from the pro-Western factions within Ukraine, such as Vladimir Zelensky, is that Russia will influence that election to install a pro-Kremlin Ukrainian president to give them more favourable terms. At the same time, of course, Donald Trump is in the mix now, trying to get more favourable terms, not necessarily for the Kremlin, although his interests and the Kremlin's are strangely aligned, but he wants to get America a whole lot of money in return for the money that they've given Ukraine, which is largely in rare earth minerals and other resources, which happen to be in that disputed part of eastern Ukraine that Russia also wants. So this is a very complicated situation, but the rhetoric from Donald Trump calling Zelensky a dictator, and Zelensky in return saying that Donald Trump lives in a disinformation bubble, which is basically disinformation from the Kremlin, it has been rather tit for tat.
Yeah, can you go into a little bit more detail for us about these discussions around mineral resources that Donald Trump is asking Ukraine about? And as you said, seemingly a bit of a request for a return on investment for helping Ukraine in its war efforts.
So this was a negotiation that Zelensky a week or so ago said, we're not going to continue having this discussion at this time. We want to stop a war. We can figure out, just as they did after the First World War, there were reparations that were paid by Germany after their defeat in the First World War, which ultimately became the trigger of the Second World War, so people are concerned about making countries pay too much. And bear in mind here, of course, Ukraine is the victim. Even though Trump effectively accused Ukraine of starting the war by not giving away Crimea and the eastern provinces of Ukraine to Putin when he wanted them, which is a classic case of kind of international victim blaming. So the talk stalled over mineral resources, but it is one of those issues that would have been on the agenda for Zelensky and Keith Kellogg, who conducted their meeting in Kyiv today. Fascinating though, Mel, because both Zelensky and Keith Kellogg, who is Trump's Ukraine envoy, they're excluded from this week's talks in Saudi Arabia that were conducted between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, the respective foreign ministers of the United States and Russia. Keith Kellogg, fascinating that he was effectively silenced by the Trump administration not to give this press conference, because Keith Kellogg is much more pro-Ukraine at this point than Donald Trump is. So Kellogg would have been put in a very awkward position had he appeared at this press conference, because he would have been standing there with Zelensky and he'd been asked questions from pesky journalists like you, Mel. Is this man a dictator? Should he be giving away his mineral resources to America in return for peace and security guarantees? So you can see why they cancelled this, but it also says that we've got this weird situation now where Trump is much closer to Moscow's side. Keith Kellogg and Republicans back in Washington, D.C. are typically on Ukraine's side, but nobody's really prepared to say that they are against Trump on all of this. And nobody really knows, is this Trump just being Trump? Is this Trump trying to get a better deal in terms of more mineral resources for the United States from Ukraine? Or is he actually just being overly influenced by Vladimir Putin? It's the age-old question with Trump. We don't know with this. Is it genius? Is it stupidity? Or is it something even more sinister than that? We're none the wiser.
Moving forward, and you might not be able to answer this, but moving forward, how do you see the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky? Is it repairable at this point?
Well, a war of words with Donald Trump or from Donald Trump is no disqualifier for working with Donald Trump and becoming his best friend. As long as you say nice things about him, he will eventually start saying nice things about you. Bear in mind, J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, described Donald Trump as America's Hitler. And now he's a heartbeat away from the presidency himself. So yeah, Zelensky has to keep being as diplomatic as he can possibly be while he's being called a mediocre comedian and dictator by Donald Trump. He needs to just keep his eye on the big picture, which is to say, well, we don't want to have Trump do a deal with Putin that gives away 20% plus of Ukraine and gives Ukraine no security guarantee that they won't just be invaded again by Russia, who will presumably make it all the way to Kyiv next time, as they failed to do 3 years ago.
Separately, Kash Patel is a bit of a controversial choice from Donald Trump. Take us through this decision and what's going on here.
Yeah, important news out of Washington today, Mel. Kash Patel was Donald Trump's nominee to become the next director of the FBI, a role which carries with it a lot of power to direct the Federal Bureau of Investigation to investigate suspected criminals, organised crime, bad people. The concern is that Kash Patel, who is very much a Trump loyalist, is somebody who is not traditionally qualified for the role of FBI director. He briefly served as a federal prosecutor, but at a junior level. His principal qualification is Donald Trump likes him because he's a conservative sort of MAGA firebrand. But he has said some very worrying things, such as, well, first, he wants to purge the FBI of the people who went after Donald Trump, all those criminal convictions and trials that Donald Trump faced, which, even though they were ultimately determined by juries that Trump was guilty and a criminal on 32 felony counts, their argument is the FBI was acting for Joe Biden, it was all political, so let's get rid of all of them. Once they've purged the FBI, then there's this suggestion, Mel, that Kash Patel is going to start using what is left of the FBI, the now Trump-loyal FBI, to go after Trump's other enemies, including enemies in the media. So journalists are really worried because Kash Patel is saying, well, people in the media who say things we don't like about Donald Trump, we're going after them. In the old days, someone like Richard Nixon 50 plus years ago would use the Inland Revenue Service, the tax office, to harass people they didn't like, audit them, go through their tax, send them tax bills and all these kinds of things. Sending the FBI in goes even further than Richard Nixon was prepared to go. And we all know how it turned out for Richard Nixon with Watergate. So weaponising the FBI, using it against American citizens, as Kash Patel has said he would do, well, it remains to be seen if he delivers on that or not, and whether the guardrails around the Justice Department, which is meant to operate very separately from the presidency, with Patel there, it's a part of the presidency. And that's what's happening in so many of these departments now with these controversial choices, Robert F. Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard and others. Trump is drawing all of this power into the Oval Office, and people are concerned about how he will exercise that enormous power that he is gathering around him now.